What makes ReZero so good? I mean, no, really, what makes this series so enjoyable and is making it get such a second win within the anime community? I feel like as of recently, ReZero has had almost a second kick and a rejuvenation amongst the fans. Now, whether that be for literally all the wrong reasons and not the actual story, it's true regardless. And I feel like within this second kick, a lot of people have become detached to the core ideas of the series and what exactly about ReZero makes it so good as a series, not just, from an enjoyability stance, but from a writing stance, and why there's many deep messages tied to the core, themes of ReZero and what the series as a whole is looking to portray. So within today's video, that is exactly what I'm going to be talking about. What makes ReZero so good and why does it grasp the attention of so many different people, and how it does that with its themes and how it represents that not just through Subaru as our main character, but is able to represent that through literally every single character within ReZero. So if you enjoy this type of content and you enjoy ReZero as a whole, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. And yeah, don't mind my setup. I know looks different from normal. I changed it again, but anyways, let's just go ahead and get right into the video. So above all, I want to firstly address the main thing for many people that is going to be hit or miss, and the strongest correlation and indicator for if they are going to like ReZero as a whole, and that is going to be Natsuki Subaru himself. Subaru is so tied deeply to the core message of ReZero and the core series as a whole. He is almost like to a point representative of the entire story more than any other character. The story is able to revolve around Subaru as the main character to another level compared to most other series, being that you are around Subaru where there are times that no other character remembers, with that being the failed loops. And inconsequentially with this, you are left with Subaru even at his worst and his best moments. So what I've come to notice with this being is that anyone who enjoys Subaru is most likely going to enjoy ReZero, and anyone that doesn't enjoy Subaru is, probably going to hate and detest ReZero. And give or take, you could make that connection with literally any single, anime out there and the main character. But I think this is especially true to ReZero, especially as Subaru serves as the main vessel for so many of ReZero's themes regarding identity and self-love, which I will get into. Something that bothers me a bit when it comes to Natsuki Subaru and, a portrayal of ReZero is that this is content only really relatable for teenage boys because of, the way Subaru is portrayed, which could be said is a fair assumption, being that Subaru himself is a teenage boys, and a lot of the specific details regarding the type of person he is and what goes on within his life are only going to be relatable to teenage boys. But within that, I think is a message and a core value that can be grasped by everybody, not just teenage boys. But before I get into that, I will go over a broader point as a whole and a more tangible idea of why ReZero is so loved, and that is going to be that ReZero as a whole is a representative of an exception within the isekai genre. It is a deconstruction of isekai themes that are commonly seen as bad, and Tappei's spin on them and how he makes those themes good and how he is able to portray a loving and uprooting story within a genre that is often very, how do I say this, corny. There is no better representation of this than Subaru Natsuki himself. From the moment we see Natsuki Subaru, he is a teenage boy wandering around in a gas station in the middle of the night with essentially no purpose, picking up instant ramen, flipping around in different manga, and, side-eyeing couples as they walk by, then looking at himself within the mirror and, sighing. And this is meant to, subtly characterize Subaru as, this, loser, honestly, to say the least. He's a hikikimori within Japan. And something that you'll notice is the second Subaru gets isekai'd into the ReZero world, it is a complete 180 of how he was acting within his old world, where, he's melancholic inside of that gas station, and, second he walks out, he's like, oh, this is what I get for playing video games all day. The second he gets to the ReZero world, he thinks he's had some sort of power or being bestowed upon him. He feels as if he is invincible, and he automatically assumes, due to the media he consumed growing up and the fact he was a hikikimori obsessed with this genre, that it's only a given that he's going to get some sort of defying superpower and he's going to become some sort of main character trope or some sort of hero within this new world, which is exactly not the case and is something that most people would assume if they were isekai, being the tropes that are given within a typical isekai. But bearing off this fact and, Subaru's overall feelings that he is going to be some sort of superhero, and from the rip, this developing some sort of hero complex and Subaru trying to be someone he's not, it's able to tie into ReZero's, core messages about identity, in which, there is more than just ReZero being a deconstruction of isekai as to why Subaru acts as such. There is a deeper layered message that like I said, think is tangible for everybody, and that has to do with identity and self-love. identity is not just something that is crafted off of your personal memory alone. This is a common philosophical belief and something discussed frequently, but many believe, and what I think ReZero goes to portray, is that identity is a combination, a collective of your own personal memory, only the things you can see and remember, and society, or rather the people's around you interpretation of you. I think a better way to put this is collective reminiscence of who you are as a person. These mesh together, and with this, your name is created and that impression is left. Well, Natsuki Subaru never had an identity. From the moment Natsuki Subaru was brought up, he constantly had the pressure and the bearing of being compared to his father, the great Kenichi Natsuki, who within his town was essentially a local hero and somebody who was amazing. And no matter what Subaru did, no matter how good it was, no matter how bad it was, constantly was he compared to that name of Kenichi Natsuki, in which people would constantly tell him that you're definitely his kid. Well, bearing this and giving such a collective impression of a child at such a young age is bound to leave an impact, and this left Subaru going down multiple different routes, attempting to distinguish and individualize himself from the name that is Kenichi Natsuki, and while simultaneously trying to live up to that name and be someone great while being his own person, being his Natsuki Subaru. This subsequently led Subaru to latching on to a multitude of different shallow identities, whether that be the funniest in the room, or be the baddest kid, or be the silliest, so on and so forth, until Subaru eventually got up one day, looked himself in the mirror, and realized he was tired. He did not want to do this anymore. It was exhausting. Going to school, the social pressure of it all, it was exhausting, and whether he didn't say it explicitly, it's how he felt. So he started skipping. Slowly and surely, that collectively built up to where Subaru developed into the person he was, an escapist who thrusted all his identity into a fantasy world in which that he, could escape the name and the bearing of Kenichi Natsuki. Well, when you look at what ReZero is and its core themes, you realize that the second Subaru was isekai'd into the ReZero world, all this was another avenue and another attempt and another, chance for Subaru to distinguish himself from the name of Kenichi Natsuki without actually, bearing any weight and, really changing who he is deep down as a person and starting from zero. And a lot of this can really be seen well with how Subaru acts with Emilia's character, in which he uses so many different video games terms and assumes, he's just gonna get her as a pretty girl and so on and so forth. And, it's this idea, this toxic grasp on reality that really drives Subaru's character arc within those first couple of, arcs of ReZero, and drives him as a character and as a person, and shows the bad and gross sides of Subaru, while also showing that deep down there also is a person there. And it's so funny, and the way Tappei portrays this is so amazingly, especially within arc 2 of the series. And this is where I really think, ReZero starts becoming some of people's favorite series, where you get to actually witness Subaru in the act, try to put on this fake act and this fake persona, where he's literally trying time and time again, and it's hyperbolically, almost, metaphorically represented through the literal killing of Subaru and the use of Return by Death by Rem, that Subaru needs to stop trying to fake and be a tough guy and, clean everything up, and instead needs to actually sit down, relax, and let the people around him, comfort him, that being Emilia. And even though she may not directly understand what's going on with him, he needs to realize that that's okay. And he does for a moment, and it's only then and there that you see Subaru be emotionally vulnerable, that he is able to progress within this story. And it is, again, this is another theme as to why people love ReZero. That theme of emotional vulnerability, and showing that the only way to really have emotional and deep-rooted progress within yourself is by being emotionally vulnerable to the people around you and letting them help you grow and being open. And it teaches a good message at the core that, being open with the people around you and being honest with them and, yourself is subsequently the only way to move forward within life if you are stuck at some point. And I really do love Arc 2 because it's a unique moment within ReZero, especially leading up to before Arc 3 of the series, in which a lot of people drop ReZero due to Subaru's actions towards Emilia within episode 13 of the anime. But it's that moment specifically that really makes him so much greater than every other main character out there. Arc 2 is able to, be a weird middle ground of showing Subaru's flaws and bad traits, while also subsequently showing that he deep down is a good person. And we see that no better than with his talk with Rem, and in which arc 2, he is able to help Rem, and without even trying, just being Natsuki Subaru and just being a nice person, is able to subsequently become her hero, which, as we know, will play a heavy role later. But that's her perception of Subaru, her collective reminiscence of Natsuki Subaru. To her, Natsuki Subaru is a hero, even though to Natsuki Subaru himself, he is a fraud and a fake. And that idea of identity, of collective reminiscence versus your own personal tangible memory, is really extrapolated and brought forth even more through Return by Death and all of Subaru's failed loops, and just adds another layer to this idea around identity within ReZero and what makes us us and what is really within a name. And yeah, like I said, subsequently this leads us to arc 3 of the series, and really where people make their ultimate decision on ReZero, that being because they make their ultimate decision on Subaru. The people who can, typically bear with Subaru in episode 13 and make it through the rest of arc 3 tend to fall in love with the series and, appreciate it for all of its great, themes and messages and expansive lore, whereas people who can't take, this cringy, insufferable guy in episode 13 and witness a realistic depiction of a character growing and, becoming better realistically, not just, some with a snap of a finger, are the ones who typically drop it and typically hate ReZero. Because, my whole point with this is that Subaru is tied to the core theme and the core message of ReZero, in which within arc 3 of ReZero, we witness some of the most brutal, to say the least, sequences of character events and character representations, but from a main character within any series out there. I mean, the only other series I can think that really holds a candle of not being shy to depict their main character as more or less a asshole is Neon Genesis Evangelion, in which it does not shy away from Shinji's bad moments, to say the least. But getting back to our main character, Natsuki Subaru, we see him essentially with the burden of this fake identity and this idea that he's going to get something in return from Emilia or progress within the world just because he is doing all these kinds of acts for her, even though she never asked him to do these to begin with. And that was stated from the very first moment that they met. Subsequently take a toll on him, mixed with, the hyperbolic effects of Return by Death and the fact that she can't fully understand, and Subaru can't come to terms with the fact that she can't fully understand. We see Subaru lash out, in which he freaks out on her saying so many negative and mean things, in which in reality is probably in a sense directed towards himself, not her, and his own inconsequences and his own failures. But through this, we see Subaru try to hard-headedly run his way into a wall over and over again, going through the worst deaths within the series up until that point within Arc 3, and, a point that truly felt hopeless. Arc 3's ability to craft that sense of hopelessness, whether it be with Episode 15 or Episode 16, is really insane, and all of this just makes the moment that it leads up to, and one of the core moments within all of ReZero, from Zero in episode 18, all the more impactful. And this just goes to show another reason why ReZero is so loved, due to the realistic depiction of a main character. I hate when series try to portray a main character's, development as some exponential thing, like they are just going to only develop and that's it. Real character growth and real development in a real world is not an exponential thing. You are going to have ups and downs. There is going to be times where you go 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back and then 5 steps forward. That is just how people are. Nobody is perfect. Nobody has, growth on a linear path. And ReZero represents this amazingly within Arc 3 and continuously so in Arc 4 and throughout the rest of the series, in which you see characters, despite having their character moment of growth, still deep down struggle with thoughts at times, even though ultimately it shows that they are able to persevere through this by relying on the people around them. But yeah, like I was saying, we get to the pivotal moment of Arc 3, that being From Zero, and this is really the scene that a lot of people fall in love with ReZero again, although you will get the occasional Rem fan who, is illiterate and, just walks away and thinks that Rem should have been with Subaru, even though that would have made no sense for the story and would have just been Subaru continuing his running away problems. But nonetheless, we get the pivotal moment of From Zero, in which Subaru being himself, that, all the way back within Arc 2, and, being someone's hero subsequently, and without him even realizing it, the memory of someone else and the memory of Rem, Natsuki Subaru, is a hero, came back to play in his good, and is really able to show him that, despite he may not realize or he may not remember, Rem remembers. She remembers the person that Natsuki Subaru was within Arc 2 and the great guy he was, even though Subaru's mind has become so clouded up until this point, and is ultimately able to convince him to not run away, have him, achieve and go back to his main goal of saving Emilia, in which, of course, we see Subaru doing such that, and he eventually does save Emilia, which ultimately leads us into Arc 4 of the series, which really tackles all these ideas from a fresher and different lens, and really where, it broadens ReZero. Fun fact, for me, ReZero did not become my favorite until Arc 4, and that's because I think Arc 4 is able to really extrapolate on these ideas and expand them not just from Subaru, but make them the entire cast. And that is going to lead me to the next point of this video and segue into the next topic. Subaru and the core themes of ReZero are so interconnected with every single character within the series. You can literally make a parallel or dynamic to almost any side character to Natsuki Subaru and have a valid connection there and a valid interpretation, while that also being a unique perspective on such themes and identities that are so tied to the core message of ReZero regarding identity and self-love. Arc 4 is the arc of character growth. We finally essentially get to see the backstories of every single main character in our series and, figure out why they are the way they are. It is when we get the best moment within the ReZero anime, that being parent and child. And we get, more lens and, perspective on why Subaru is the way he is, and a first look hand at his struggle with his identity and being compared to his father. And doing so and seeing all the other characters, we see they all struggle with identity within their own lens, which really builds up their character. Whether it be with a character like Amelia, who I don't think a lot of people realize, but she struggles from the exact same problem as Subaru, just on the opposite lens, being that Subaru constantly has to deal with these comparisons of, looking like and being like somebody so great and having to live up to the mantle of that. Well, we see the opposite perspective from Amelia, where she is constantly compared to and, called the literal worst person in the entire world, the essential devil of the ReZero world. And she has to live with that burden and try no matter what to distinguish herself and still go through racism subsequently and so many other, small things. And I mean, it's not even just Amelia, it is literally every single character within Arc 4 of ReZero that are connected to Subaru in some sort of way, whether that be Roswaal, and he's kind of like Subaru within a sense, with a more twisted set of ideals in which he believes, in determinism and thinks that nothing is going to come out of anything and, the future cannot be changed. He is a lot like Subaru if Subaru stayed hard-headed and never essentially, realized to believe in Amelia and let her be his own person. That is the main driving point of a lot of Arc 4 of ReZero, being that Subaru, he has developed, but has he developed to the point in which he'll let Amelia take the burden of something and not treat her like some sort of doll? It is the main conflict of their romantic relationship within Arc 4, and, Amelia feeling as if she's been treated like a doll her whole life, whether that be from Roswaal or Puck or so on and so forth. She has not been able to have her own person and her own identity. She's only compared to this witch and then subsequently treated like a doll by everyone around her. And, she wants Subaru to be different. She wants Subaru to treat her differently, in which Subaru tells her he can't do that, but he realizes that he can in a lens that he will, acknowledge Amelia's flaws and acknowledge her as a person. That's exactly why Amelia gets so upset when Subaru takes the trials for her, because all that is a continuation of Subaru not being able to acknowledge who Amelia is, and Subaru must come to terms with the fact that he has to let Amelia do this, and really that's the only way that they are going to get out of this situation to begin with. And that ties into a bigger message and something more related to Subaru's character on a broader scope, being that Subaru does not need to tackle this burden alone. He must learn to rely on the people around him and, connect with the people around him. And that's where this theme of connectivity is really brought forth. And this specifically is what made me fall in love with ReZero. Subaru's realization that he can rely on his friends because his friends rely on him. And nobody portrays this better than Otto Suin within Arc 4, in which Otto is able to change Subaru's mind entirely. Without Otto, ReZero would probably still be stuck within the sanctuary. Otto is the first one who is really able to make Subaru realize that he has friends and that these aren't just people within some sort of game, like I said with the exponential growth thing. And this ability to rely on the people around him and recognize that he does not have to solely rely on his ability for everything is where Subaru is able to distinguish himself from the antagonist of Arc 4, that being Roswaal. And same thing with Echidna, honestly. These are two people who solely rely on their ability. They listen to the book and the book alone. They don't listen to anyone else. They don't take anyone's help. They just go off of what they know, trying to predict the future, and don't take into account, factors that could influence such future events. Whereas Subaru learns and realizes that while return by death is a great ability, it is not something he should solely rely on. And that's what they try to tell him in all of his meetings with the witches, and, try to reiterate that point that it is selfish and greedy of Natsuki Subaru to not rely on the people around him and take on this painful burden. And that's also what he's trying to be shown within the second trial, in which he has to witness all these people's reactions to, him offing himself essentially. But through this realization that you must rely on the people around you, and that it's okay to rely on everybody around you, and that we all struggle with our own personal issues and our own issues revolving identity and our sense of self and who we are deep down, Subaru is able to progress through a seemingly impossible task that, was impossibly set up by Roswaal and Echidna, and progress through Arc 4 while simultaneously doing so in the right way, whether it be with characters like Beatrice or Garfield. Subaru is able to save them, not within the sense of, forcefully saving them, and when she just tells Beatrice, oh, choose me because, you're me, but choose me because of the connection that can be made there. And, the fact that we are similar, and that even though I may not be here forever, the time that I was here was some of the most enjoyable time in your life, and you're never going to forget such a thing, which makes, don't even get me started on Choose Me, such a great scene within itself, such a great piece of written dialogue. But Beatrice really, paralleling Subaru, same thing with Garfield within a sense. It's kind of funny, these parallels and how they work, but Beatrice is really a hikikomori, just like Subaru, somebody who never wanted to leave, wanted to stay inside, and was scared of really approaching the real world within any sort of sense, and clinging on to that escapist idea, and, knowing deep down that even though somebody may not appear one day, wishfully thinking so, and thinking that somebody will, even though she knew it would never happen. And same thing can be said with Garfield when it has, his relationship towards his mom and his fear of leaving the sanctuary, so on and so forth. It's very indicative of Subaru's own relationship with his parents and the own ideas that manifest with such a thing. With all that being said, Arc 4 really is one of the greatest arcs within all of ReZero, and personally for me this is exactly why this is still a top 2 arc for ReZero for me. So many of the characters' development and growth and backstory is just portrayed within this arc. It'd be almost impossible to not have it as a top arc within the series. But moving forth, Arc 5 is really able to extrapolate on these ideas and this character growth and the new dynamics that were discovered within Arc 4, being that Arc 5 is essentially an execution arc in which we see a lot of our main characters, grow. That's represented through the fact that Subaru literally only had to reset like once this arc because he's grown. He knows to rely on the people around him. He knows that the second he, has to use Return by Death to tell Beatrice almost immediately, in which instead before he would try to hard-headedly, get his way around it, he knows to rely on the people around him. And that's why we see so much growth within Arc 5 and, such little, I guess you could say, deterrence in, how hard it is to get past such a seemingly impossible task. Furthermore, we've also seen the development of Subaru and Amelia's relationship, whereas, it's kind of a play on the damsel in distress trope in which, a lot of times you will have the two people come and save the girl in distress. Instead, this time you have Reinhard without his sword and Subaru without his spear user, and then once Amelia is saved, she is the one who actually takes down Regulus. I really like that idea, and how Tappei does that, and I think that's really funny, and that plays into another thing, Regulus and the antagonist within ReZero. Every single antagonist is almost, if not a representation of a, crazed ideal version of Subaru. Being that Regulus represents this controlling Arc 3 version of Subaru in which, he wants to make every decision for Amelia and not really let her be her own person. You can make the similar connection with Betelgeuse. It's if Subaru's obsession with, Amelia goes to an extreme, that's what it looks like with Betelgeuse and, his obsession with Satella. Speaking of side characters, that is another lens of ReZero that I think makes it so amazing. Tying back to that idea that Subaru is really able to parallel and connect with almost, if not every single side character within all of ReZero. Let me give you an example. A character such as Felix, a character many people just look at as, some cat boy, is actually deeply paralleled with Subaru and has many sort of connections. I think the easiest way to point this out is within Arc 3 of the series, within the novels, Felix essentially puts a monobomb inside a Subaru. I don't know the exact explanation for it. I get, corrected on this every single time. Just know he put some sort of device inside of Subaru to try to, hinder him and make sure that if he tried to switch up on Krush, Subaru would just be off. This is insane to say the least, and is all stemming from his obsession with Krush, being that he has tied his core identity to Krush as a person. Everything Felix does, all the way he acts, is directly tied to Krush. The reason he dresses the way he does, the reason he talks the way he does, it is all for Krush. And that sense of relying on somebody to a gross manner and a gross state, to the fact that when Krush lost her memories, Felix lost his identity with that. When Krush lost her identity, Felix also lost his identity. Felix really is a representation of this twisted version of Subaru that we see within Arc 3, who is grossly obsessed with Amelia and, does things without asking her and goes about everything literally the completely wrong way, without getting her consent for literally anything. Felix and Subaru are literally about as far away from each other on the spectrum of abilities as you can get. Felix is the greatest healer within all of the world, whereas Subaru is somebody whose ability is literally, working around getting hurt and hurting himself. And this really makes Felix have a disinterest and a distaste for Subaru, being how quickly and how willing Subaru is to, give up his life and not value his life a lot of the times. At least, Felix thinks, based off his impression of him within Arc 3 and Arc 4, where Subaru really was like that. That idea to Felix is gross and grotesque, to his core as a healer. And to make it all really worse and rub salt in the wound for Felix, the only one that can really help Crush within Arc 5 of the series is Subaru himself, while Felix has to essentially sit there and watch and not be able to, heal her in any sort of way. Subaru subsequently can for whatever reason. But yeah, so many deep biting connections and parallels based around identity and, personal reminiscence, so on and so forth, between two characters who, on the surface level, many people don't really look much past. And that's my point, that ReZero is able to weave these characters like a web, in such an effortless way. There is a mechanism to the craze, to the web that Tappei has crafted, and there is a piece of substance there with almost, if not every single side character within the entire series. I mean, past Felix, you could look at other side characters like Julius without getting into spoilers. I mean, you guys know Julius loses his name at the end of Arc 5. It is shown Julius forthgoing is going to have to forbide with this idea in the sense that he is a nameless knight. Nobody remembers him or his actions in the same sense that Natsuki Subaru was a nameless knight within Arc 3, somebody who, was self-proclaiming to be, Amelia's helper and saver, even though she never bestowed that title upon him. Plays into their connection and Julius's own struggle with identity and the mantle of being, this gentleman and, this high regarded person and how he struggles with that. Or we could look at a character like Reinhard, who, despite having this divine power and this divine ability and supposed to be a representation of essentially everything Subaru thought he was going to be when initially isekai'd into the world of ReZero, is somebody who has deeply rooted family issues and family problems. And, that's also one of the best avenues within ReZero. And I haven't even touched upon that. Whereas Subaru is somebody who, given a twisted, cursed ability to say the least, is somebody who comes from a supportive and loving family, and his family is able to reconfirm his identity and help him as a person. Nonetheless, it's that same theme of identity and personal struggle and who we are as a person and where is our worth tied back together from completely opposite lenses, which is really just me trying to reiterate my point that ReZero is so effortlessly and so, seamlessly able to weave together a story about identity and interpersonal connections from many different unique lenses, while also tying it back to our main character Natsuki Subaru in such a way that it feels unique and broadening, and it makes us feel as if there is a real connection between those two said characters. Its ability to do this with literally every single character within, the cast is honestly impressive and honestly insane. And that right there is the main reason why I think so many people love ReZero. Where I could point to a more surface level idea being that people just think the mechanism is cool of Return by Death, or that, people like the animation, they like the fights, they like the psychological background, they like the lore, which, mind you, all of these reasons are why people love ReZero. All of these reasons and all of these things make ReZero good. But what really makes ReZero stand out and what really makes ReZero unique is its take on identity and its ability to conforge upon such ideals and craft such a broadening narrative that is able to seamlessly weave itself together and ultimately tie back to our main character, Natsuki Subaru, who is so tangibly tied to the core theme of ReZero that if you don't like Natsuki Subaru, you're not gonna like ReZero, and so on and so forth. And that is also why I think Subaru is literally like the greatest character out there. Natsuki Subaru is ReZero. He is the core message, and that is why he is such a main character and why ReZero is so loved. And that, at least to me, is what makes it so good. That ability to weave together so many ideals and so many representations of a common theme, that being self-love and identity, and realizing that you should rely on the people around you is just amazing to me. And there's no better execution and representation of such a big theme within all of media, in my opinion. I think ReZero is able to execute on this pivotal theme and this pivotal idea better than literally anything out there. And that is due to more than just, the writing of Tappei, but to the literal structure of the story with an ability like Return by Death. It is literally hyperbole for, having your own personalized memories that no one else can remember. while also having a collective reminiscence that you don't even realize because you've been in so many loops that many other people don't remember. The core structure of the story and the core themes of the story is so deeply rooted and so tied together and so seamlessly crafted. It's honestly insane how someone could even write such a story and it all connect and all make sense. I don't get it, honestly, but nonetheless it is there. And with all of that being said, I haven't even talked about arc 6, 7, 8, and 9, which only continue to further expand upon these themes, especially arc 6. So yeah, this is really just me talking about ReZero arcs 1 through 5. Arc 6 is literally considered the best arc within the series, and if I, made a video on that, this would probably be twice as long, but I don't have the time for that. Let's just say, there's a reason why Tappei ties into gluttony so heavily, and why gluttony is his favorite sin. It is the best representation of the core themes of ReZero and what ReZero stands for. One other thing I would like to put is, I really hate when ReZero gets the mantle of just an isekai. I really wish that title didn't exist. Yes, I know ReZero is an isekai, technically speaking, but when people try to class it as such and nothing broader, it really, annoys me. ReZero is a fantasy with a time loop mechanism that deeply delves into core themes about, identity and such. If ReZero was made in the West, if ReZero had, Western, production and so on and so forth, and this was a Western cartoon, there would be no isekai mantle. This would just be universally loved. But because that trope is there, even though ReZero is a literal deconstruction of isekai, which is one of the main reasons why people like it, it's going to always have to deal with that mantle. ReZero is almost too good for its own good to a point, especially when it comes to, certain characters and the crafting of certain things. I mean, Tappei wrote Rem and Subaru's speech so well 10 years ago that so many people were upset and mad that Rem wasn't the main heroine that it's still discussed about to this day. And even though she as a character has been irrelevant in the series for over 10 years at this point, people are still obsessed with her and are still half the reason they watch ReZero. And her, little anime figures are the main driver of income for the series, even 10 plus years later. The character writing is so good for some characters that it's actually insane. It's almost dangerous for the series. But with all that being said, I would just like to restate my point and restate my claim. The reason ReZero is good is because it is able to collectively weave together so many groups of ideas and themes regarding identity, self-love, and is able to portray together and make a mechanism to the chaos of ideas that you should love yourself and that your identity is not solely based off of what you see, while also your identity is not based solely off of what others see. You are in control of your destiny. With this idea and this thought that, personal memory and collective reminiscence is what forms you as a person, go ahead and take in such ideas and realize that even if you feel like you are the most hated person within the world, there are still people out there who enjoy and love your presence. And even at moments where you feel as if you are worthless because of, your own memory, or you feel like there are people out there who hate you and no one likes you, realize that you just being here is enough self-worth and enough self-love, and you don't need to take and carry the burden of everything on your shoulders. And it's okay to rely on your parents or the people around you. And the only thing that not opening up and being honest with yourself is going to do is further deeply root these problems. You as a person need to start from zero and realize that starting from zero is okay and a completely normal and acceptable thing within itself. And at the end of the day, to just love everybody. First impressions are important, but think if Subaru had only ever gone off of first impressions of so many of these characters. Literally, if not almost every single character within ReZero except Emilia, in some sort of way, off their first rip and impression of Subaru, have tried to hurt him or damage him or been rude and nasty to him. But he subsequently realized that despite having, this divine power and this ability to literally, change the fate of these people and change the fate of this world and be evil, his strength comes from, despite having that power, being able to choose to try to help these people and try to save these people, and realizing that's where, strength in being a hero comes from. And that's ultimately where you being human comes from. And being human is to choose that over choosing to hurt the people around you. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. This was quite a think piece, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I really enjoyed making this video. This was a long one, but yeah, anyways, peace.